South Africa's foreign policy on Russia is a matter of international debate. We get some perspective from Terence Corrigan of the South African Institute of Race Relations. Terence, what informs this policy?
Well, I think you have to go back to the beginning and ask what informs our foreign policy in general. Now, I think the first thing to note is that the state of our governance system as a whole is, to put it mildly, not good, and that is reflected in our foreign service bureaucracy as well. I think the most pertinent point to make about this is that the biggest geopolitical event last year, which was Russia's invasion of Ukraine, caught South Africa unawares. That tells you pretty much everything you need to know. That basically South Africa's foreign policy apparatus just wasn't ready for it. That's why you had that statement calling on Russia to withdraw, and then that was walked back. That's not the actions of a serious foreign policy establishment. South Africa. All countries, have a degree of political influence on their on the staffing of their foreign missions. The ability to go and live for a few years in a foreign capital and have an expense account that lets you keep up with the locals is a very enticing one. I understand the global norm is about 30% of ambassadors are selected on that basis. In South Africa, the figure I've heard, and this is, obviously a kind of back of the envelope calculation, is 80%. And right back since the 1990s, people have been sent to foreign missions, either to keep them out the way, to resolve an ANC internal issue, or maybe to offer a kind of sinecure to an opposition politician. The point is, though, that we don't have the kind of professional civil service that a foreign civil service that we need. South Africa has one of the largest diplomatic footprints in the world, and for that, I'm not sure what we get. The National Development Plan itself said that we had to very seriously consider this. This is not to say that there is an argument for South Africa having a large diplomatic footprint, but there's a question of return on investment, and we simply are not. We simply are not getting that. It's not functioning as a facilitator of business. It doesn't seem to be functioning much as a conduit of information. Now, if we're going to be caught unawares by, as I say, the biggest geopolitical story of 2022, how then to understand South Africa's Russia policy? Well, I think that this is actually one issue where principle of sorts is actually very important. South Africa is often criticized for having an unprincipled foreign policy, but I don't think that's true. I think that in the absence of a high level of skill in geopolitical positioning and the institutions to carry it out, it often defaults back to ideology. And I think that what the American ambassador, Ambassador Bridgety, said about the ANC's foreign policy documents goes, essentially explains the story. South Africa views itself as being part of this anti-imperialist bloc, very much in the mold of sort of the 1950s, what they call the Bandung generation, and it sees its the primary source of global problems as being imperialism. Imperialism is something directed by Western countries. So, the United States, the European Union, Canada, Japan, Australia, those are all, in that imperialist camp. That is where the root of all your problems must be located. So for South Africa, it's not so much a question of whether Russian ordinance is on Ukrainian real estate, but about how imperialism manipulates that situation. It's in that scenario, a country like Ukraine, and I noticed that in Ukraine, President Ramaphosa, possibly unawares, referred to it as the Ukraine, which is a geographical expression, something that the Ukrainians find very, very offensive, because it undermines their status as a sovereign nation, reducing them to a geographical abstraction. That's essentially President Putin's talking point. You see the same thing in his one ANC document. But yes, that is a country that's in effect defected from this liberationist camp, this anti-imperialist camp, and is trying to get in bed with the imperialists. Think of this very much in the 1980s sense of Ukraine being an impimpi, or Poland for that matter. Poland is part of the Warsaw Pact. It invested great hopes in aligning itself now with the European Union, with NATO, and I think from the vantage point of the ANC, that essentially makes it a hostile country. So and from that, I think flows the assumptions that inform South Africa's positioning. Towards the about 2 or 3 weeks after the invasion, there was an article written by Clayton Monyela, probably the DIRCO's senior spokesman, and it was interesting. This read very much like a Russian explanation for the war. Went into great detail about NATO expansion and how without NATO expansion we wouldn't be in this situation. It was interesting that he explained Russia's concerns very clearly, Ukraine's not at all, or at least in very general terms. And reading that, you could almost forget, as I say, that it was Russian ordnance on Ukrainian real estate. But in a way, this gels very, very clearly with South Africa's ideological position.
But if this policy is informed by ideology, how does this foreign policy protect South Africa's national interests, protect its economy? Shouldn't foreign policy protect national values?
Well, that depends on how you define those national values. I think a lot of people make the mistake of seeing the National Congress and the state that it oversees as a kind of classically liberal rational actor. There's a lot of reference to an article that was published under Nelson Mandela's byline, although he didn't write it himself, about how human rights would be the guiding light of South Africa's foreign policy. That was never realistic, I think. But I also think that if by that you understand that South Africa would take a solid and reliable a stand for the civil and human rights of all people around the globe, I just don't think that fits into the prevailing ideological worldview. I actually once put this to a senior official at DIRCO, and I said, well, if we think about it, China has a dreadful human rights record, yet South Africa seems to regard itself as firmly aligned with China. Iran executes homosexuals. Cuba holds political prisoners. And I said to him directly, does South Africa ever raise any objections? He sort of leaned back, sighed uncomfortably, and said, sometimes, but in a very unsystematic way. Now, this was the same guy who a few minutes earlier had given me a long exposition about South Africa's absolute commitment to the Palestinians. But the Palestinians are an ideologically acceptable cause. They are not, if you look through DIRCO's list of media statements, they're very, very specific attacks on Israel because a Palestinian civilian was killed or whatever, and one can argue the rights and wrongs of that, but you won't find anything about, for instance, the crushing of democracy in Hong Kong. You won't find anything about the mass internment of Uyghurs in Western China, or as some wags like to say, East Turkmenistan. You won't find anything about the sort of lack of civil liberties and delayed elections in the Palestinian Authority, and you certainly won't find anything about political prisoners or the harassment of democracy campaigners in Cuba. But as I say, there is a principle functioning here. The one group are considered anti-imperialists, the other groups are considered imperialists. As far as protecting national interests in terms of economics and whatever goes, I think that a lot of that comes down to the fact that we simply don't have the skills to do it. We could probably sit here for hours and discuss the number of investment road shows that the government engages in. To what purpose? Very, very, very basic things. Processing visa applications. There's enormous inefficiencies around that. There was an interesting piece written by Tony Leon, as you remember, former ambassador to Argentina. So he has some sort of insider insights, although clearly not ideologically sympathetic to the administration. Written in 2018, why was South Africa caught so flat-footed by concerns about expropriation without compensation? Now, I fought that tooth and nail, my own writing. I hope that anybody who knows my name knows it, as the guy who took on EWC. But he said that according to every source he had in Washington, although that was our biggest foreign mission, its diplomats were simply absent. They didn't attend think tank functions. They weren't networking with congressional aides. I just don't think that there is the skill, the strategy to do this. Think about what happened on the tarmac of Warsaw Chopin Airport.
Right.
First of all,
the Polish debacle. What
the Polish debacle? The wear down in Warsaw. Now, think about this. South Africa is flying there with a small army, a contingent of journalists, and 14 crates of military grade weapons. You better have your paperwork in order. Now, the government swears it did, but from everything I've heard from journalists, these sort of trips are often chaotic, and I imagine that that there were I's that hadn't been dotted and T's that had been crossed. Now, did Poland did official Poland have an axe to grind with South Africa? I have no doubt. Think about something. For South Africa, racism and apartheid, that is our national tragedy. That is our national trauma. For Poland, there are two things: communism and Russia. Don't go back 50 years. Go back to the Napoleonic Wars. Tsar Alexander refused to countenance a Polish Poland because he reckoned, that's just ridiculous and it would never, that would be a threat to Russia. The Poles contributed thousands of troops to Napoleon's army because they saw Napoleon as the figure in Europe that would actually give them their state. Now, so here comes South Africa with its paperwork not in order, lands on its tarmac carrying all of these weapons. I wonder what South Africa's diplomats in Warsaw had been saying. Let me just say, I don't think that there was any hope of a sympathetic reception, which is. But if you're going to take a position that is going to get people's backs up, then make sure that you observe all the formalities so that this sort of thing, that you aren't able to navigate. The other thing was that there was great gnashing of teeth about the Poles insisted on speaking Polish. Well, the question, to my mind, is where were the South African diplomats fluent in Polish to sock it back to them? I doubt they exist. South Africa, for all of its talk about its alignment with the BRICS, I wonder if there is a single diplomat who's fluent in Mandarin. I would doubt it. I wonder how many South African diplomats can speak Portuguese. Probably a few in that case, but look, these are very, very basic skills, and you don't get a free pass because you're a developing country.
But even if we had efficient diplomats,
yes,
would they be able to make a difference to our foreign policy if it's based on ideology? Would they be able to influence it in any way?
Well, that gets into the into a related debate about to what extent is your governance determined by your civil service and your institutions, or by your politicians. I would like to think that if if we did have a functioning foreign affairs bureaucracy, or for instance a functioning bureaucracy in any part of our state, that would at least mitigate some of the harm that was that is done by the intrusion of politics. But look, I think that if you are still sending party hacks to represent your interests in places like Japan or South Korea or Brussels or wherever, places where we actually have large economic stakes, that is problematic if they're not supported by professional diplomats who can guide you on the local customs and on who the movers and shakers are and on things that you might not want to say. At least you can sort of minimize the fallout.
Be more diplomatic.
Well, look, I think this is an interesting point. There was the comments by Ambassador Brigidi about how you'd bet his life that arms were loaded onto the Lady R. I can tell you that look, American foreign policy has its own set of challenges, but I can tell you that he didn't make that without some instruction from above.
Washington.
And he didn't say from Washington, and he didn't say it without something to back it up. Now, maybe his information is incorrect or whatever, but the point is that there was a strategy behind that. I have been in a room in Munich, which was a workshop which was attended by representatives from companies like, I think BMW was there, certainly companies with a lot of money in South Africa, plus academics with an interest in South Africa. And let me assure you, that is also a declining community. South Africa is no longer the belle of the ball. And a representative of the South African consulate stood up and said, because poverty is such a problem in the country and there's so much inequality, we must dispense with property rights and simply seize. I found myself in the position as an invited speaker, as an analyst, trying to defend South Africa and say this actually isn't foreign policy. But really, if that is what a foreign representative is going to say in front of that sort of audience, you have a problem. You have a serious problem.
Can you tell me how President Cyril Ramaphosa is viewed by foreign governments?
Well, look, I think that's a difficult question, because you would need to ask, is he viewed as a distinct species from his government? Plus, what governments are you talking about? My overall sense, and this is, I've interacted with a lot of observers from Europe and also from Asia, not so much from Latin America or from the United States or from elsewhere in Africa. Although in the African case, I do speak to a lot of intellectuals and writers and stuff. My sense is that there is a great deal of disappointment that he was seen as a reformer, and I just don't think that's credible anymore. His performance in Paris a week ago was pathetic.
I was going to ask you about that.
No, really, if you, I think that Professor Johnson said on your platform a little while ago that you can just see the body language, but it seems to be just cycling through a number of talking points. There seemed to be no understanding of the need to actually engage, which was a buzzword in South African diplomacy. We're not pro or anti, we're engaging. But this seems to be more, I'm going to show up and read my list of demands, and you must please, fulfill them. But I think in his case, it is less the way he behaves on a global stage than how he behaves domestically, or how he has failed to act domestically. I think that there was definitely a sense, I think The Economist endorsed him for election, that he was business friendly. He was he understood the gravity of problems, and he would carry South Africa through. that's just not it's just not compelling anymore. And remember that South Africa's ability to one of the weapons in its diplomatic arsenal since 1994 has been this supposed moral authority, the miracle nation. My own view is that was sacrificed on the altar of Zimbabwe by President Mbeki, and South Africa lost most of that. But I think that it does retain a kernel of relevance today, in that South Africa's ability to exercise some sort of influence is linked to its success or failure domestically. A country that can't keep the lights on, a country whose government lost control of a large swathe of its territory in July 2021. A country that can't process goods through its ports. This is not a country that can draw on great moral authority anymore. It doesn't have its relative economic strength in Africa has declined. Its ability to put troops in the field is uncertain. But if it was a nice, successful, developing country, well, it would be able to draw on that. But increasingly, it can't.
Well, while the ANC is in power, do you see any change in direction in foreign policy? No.
Look, I think that part of our problem is that, as I say, our foreign policy, such as it is, simply draws on the ANC's worldview. Now, I don't think that a country like South Africa necessarily has to be aligned with the United States, or always agree with its major trade investment partners on anything. But it needs to actually be able to play that intelligently. India is it's a member of the BRICS group. It has serious issues with China, including border issues that it's not conceivable you can get a hot war over that. So first of all, let's just park BRICS as this emerging world bloc. It's not. But it's something that makes South Africa look good. So it seems to believe that it is, but it's an exercise of self-delusion. India is also a stable, long-lasting democracy with huge problems. It has very, very close links with Russia. Its voting record at the UN is not too different from South Africa's, but it also has security agreements with the United States. It fairly skillfully plays off these competing calls on its attention. While diplomats are going to India to discuss their government's position, it's seen there is a certain logic behind it. Yes, well, we'll take the best from wherever we can get it. When it comes to confronting China, it's quite happy to cut deals with the United States. When it comes to buying its weapons, it's been a long-standing customer of Russia, and before that the Soviet Union, and it will continue. Where there are issues in global fora that it feels that as a developing country it needs to it needs muscle with, it'll go with China. There's a strong element of pragmatism behind this, which is interesting because India also followed a very kind of ideological line for a long time, but it is able to present itself as a very serious country on the world stage. Plus, it has also had some very notable development successes. Now, once again, still most population is very poor, but you can go to places like Mumbai and Delhi, and you see what could be a superpower of the future. Go to central Joburg, you don't see that.
Thank you. And Terence, that was Terence Corrigan from the Institute of Race Relations speaking to BizNews about South Africa's foreign policy.